And we are so excited that you're able to join us today for today's session on mid-career changes amidst the Great Resignation, Part 1. This is a two-part series, and hopefully you can also join us for our second part on Friday, and that's something you can find on the Alumni Association website. This session is actually brought to you by the Asian Pacific American Alumni Network as part of the Alumni Association's Career Week, which is a week-long virtual event series to help alumni like you conquer, steer, and advance your career. My name is Sylvie Song, and I'm the president of APAAN, and really excited to have you guys today. Just a quick reminder that this webinar is recorded, and by participating, you acknowledge and consent to your image, likeness, or voice being recorded. Thank you so much, and I'm going to hand it over to Jennifer Tepper here, who's part of our alumni APAAN board, who's going to be our moderator for today, and I will just be doing tech help on the background, so let me know if you need any help. Thanks, guys.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sylvie. Thanks everyone for joining us today. And thank you for those who have filled out the form that has some questions. I want to first start off by welcoming one of our panelists, Wendy Wang, who is on, you can see her on video here. I'm totally okay with everybody staying off video if that's easier for folks. But she will be, we will have her, and hopefully we'll have somebody else joining us. His name is James. If he cannot jump on, it may just be because of work obligations today. But for those of you guys who did take time off today, thank you so much. And we're gonna get started. So please pay attention to the chat. We will be trying to make this as interactive as possible. We sent out a survey a little while ago as we were preparing for Career Week, and most folks wanted this to be as much of an interactive conversation as possible. Before we get into that interaction, I wanted to just say that, do a quick introduction. So I graduated from the Smith School of Business in 2009. I graduated from undergrad in 1999. I have been in both nonprofit and for-profit sectors, and I run my own business that's related to both some consulting support for both nonprofits and for-profits, as well as hospitality and tourism with a property that we own in New Mexico. I am a biological mother of 5 children, and I have 8 kids total, so 3 stepdaughters. And so the balance is real. I feel like I've probably had about 7 mid-career shifts so far. So I can definitely talk to what it means, how to think about it, and how, how to really manage that work-life balance, especially for various stages and phases of your own personal and professional journey. So today I'm going to be, I'm in the role of kind of chiming in and also getting your questions answered, but I also want to share with you our co-presenter here, Wendy. And Wendy, if you don't mind just sharing a little bit about your background and history with the group, I'd really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. I'm a University of Maryland graduate, class of 1997. I've been, graduated with a women's studies degree with a focus on Asian American women, and was part of the student movement to establish a formal Asian American studies program on campus, and it still exists today. It's growing and flourishing, and so I mean, it's that was a large part of my time at University of Maryland. But since then, I have a pretty broad experience. I think an intersection of hospitality, profit, nonprofit organizations or companies that have spent time with like the Herbie Hancock Institute of Jazz, Ritz-Carlton, Le Pain Quotidien. I've done management, I think some of you are like entrepreneurs. I've done some contracting work with my own company, but currently I'm in a management role at the Capital Area Food Bank in Washington, D.C. In direct distribution. So have been with this organization for about 3 years, and have yeah, and kind of focusing also on, race equity and diversity initiatives here with the organization. Jennifer,
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry about that. Thank you so much, Wendy. And our other presenter, James, is here. So James, do you mind kind of giving a little introduction to yourself and your relationship with the University of Maryland and kind of the Great Resignation, kind of where you are in your mid-career? And you're on mute.
There we go. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay, yeah. Hey, so my name is James. I graduated from Maryland in 2010 with a degree in mechanical engineering. And I've been kind of floating around different jobs here and there, but eventually I just settled working at Tesla, and I've been there for about 6 years. So I'm pretty senior over there right now, and I've been kind of trying to decide what my next moves are going to be, either staying with the company or working out with something else. So it's kind of like things are open in the air right now, and I think there's a lot of opportunities out there. So yeah, just here to discuss kind of my thought process on how to select, what my thought process on like what to look for, and also kind of like the things that I'm looking for and how my priorities have been shifting since I've been getting more senior.
Great. Thank you so much, James. I really appreciate it. So before we dive into these questions, I'm going to be, so actively monitor your chat. I'm going to be sending some questions and some kind of informal polls through the chat. So, just quickly, what do you think? Here's the question. What do you think is responsible for the Great Resignation? Is the question. I'm going to put a couple of prompts in here and you guys feel free to deviate from them. And so people feel free to chime in either in the chat or if you want to speak up either way. So as you guys can see, so yeah, so I have, just for those, I have pay, flexibility, COVID protocols, other. And we have people weighing in on flexibility.
I think
pandemic.
Yeah, I think pay and flexibility are the two biggest ones, at least that I've seen, especially where I work in Silicon Valley. People are getting paid a lot here, but at the same time, like the cost of living is so high that you have people go into much lower cost of living areas, and not just places like Austin. I've seen one of my coworkers, actually even before the pandemic started, he made a deal with my manager to work remotely in Minnesota.
Right.
And he was able to keep his pay and his title there and do the same job just 100% remotely. So
sure.
And especially like when you're making Silicon Valley money in Minnesota, that goes a long way.
Absolutely. And I'm seeing some of these chats. These are great answers. Learning that work doesn't have to be the way it always was. And I think it's really interesting for employers as to figuring out what that means. Flexibility, costs of living. I love the geriatric millennial comment. And a question of whether or not this is industry specific, so James spoke a little bit here, his experience kind of in the tech space. Wendy, what have you seen at the Capital Area Food Bank?
Yeah, I think we've had some similar experience. I think I shared previously with you and James that at one point my entire team, well, minus one person, had resigned, for other opportunities, I think too. And but I think there is the kind of that adjustment of now working from remote. That's kind of a top a major benefit that companies and organizations are trying to respond to. For the work that we're doing, we have definitely adjusted, but we definitely see the challenges of not having people Once again, it depends on the industry, but for this business, for this organization, there's a lot of warehouse, operations pieces. And so it's important for programmatic individuals to also be present and to be connected with their staff. And so, yeah, we're having some growing pains with those, in the administrative and programmatic feel like they can do their work. But I think overall, it's trying to find that balance where it's important to also have staff, those types of staff in office, whether it's a day or 2 days, but you need to keep that kind of energy and that collaborative kind of environment, going, and that often happens with being, present in person. So, like I said, we've adjusted, but we're going back and forth with our staff.
Right. No, I think that's a really common, not to say that it's a common problem, but I think that is exactly the epitome of what, companies are facing now. Yeah, and I see here with Mitch, and I love this, please do interact with each other's comments here in the chat. This is exactly the type of conversation. So I see burnout. I also see Mitch saying lack of respect for professionals in the field, particularly on education and medical. So it's interesting, excuse me. I have an article here that's from MSNBC that says that employees are actually leaving because of the 5 reasons they're polling is a toxic culture, which I didn't actually see anybody put here. Job insecurity and reorg, that's happening a lot in this kind of pandemic environment. And high levels of innovation is coming up a lot because as much as people talk about really wanting a highly innovative work environment, it actually leads to earlier burnout is what they're seeing in the survey. Having to constantly be on and innovating is actually hard, for people to manage. A failure, yes, I will share that link. A failure to recognize performance is coming up. And tell me if that link works or doesn't work. Failure to recognize performance and a poor response to COVID. Employers who really did not respond to the needs or the of their employees around COVID. That's really come up. The other, so then I was reading Arianna Huffington, and she's really, I just saw somebody here say they didn't want to, frame the negative, but she's really framing this as a great awakening or a great reevaluation. And that Forbes itself, and I'll throw those onto the chat as well. Forbes also said that this shift actually wasn't created by COVID, that there were clues in the kind of the US work environment that was indicating that this was going to happen regardless. Things that leaders were missing, taking for granted about the, let's just say the joy factor at work in a lot of companies, both for-profit and nonprofit. So I do have those here as well. So let me ask Wendy and James some quick questions, and then I will lead to the questions that are in this form. Okay. How would you describe, either at the food bank and or Tesla, how would you guys rate, and feel free to add color to this, the COVID response that you guys have put into? Like Wendy, I see that you're in the office right now, so what were some of the COVID response protocols? How have people adjusted for the pandemic in your work environments?
Sure, I guess we can, just a couple things. One is just being flexible to, work from home and adjust to that, and perhaps having more meetings to stay connected, not ad nauseum, but still needing to, team meetings, and still doing fun things, still staying engaged in that way. And also requiring them or encouraging them to come into office or team when needed, to prepare. Management and up can't pull, can't do everything. So we do, we have rapid tests at work. And, it's just trying to find a balance and being responsive to what's going on in the community. So I think that's tough. If you have many places being able to work from home, concerns about safety, but I feel like we've taken the measures. We have, I think, over 95% fully vaccinated. Now working on those 95 for the booster, but just really the repetition of the message is key. We are still holding our markets in the community, still working with schools, still working with our, community partners. So that is all the same. That has not changed, but it's being responsive, like providing, in some cases, PPE. This is early on in the pandemic. Now we don't really need to. But the tough thing is going to be, responding to DEI, even though we're not in the office, there's half the organization is still here pretty consistently. So DEI is quite big, but then also the landscape of balancing remote and in office. We have, as I mentioned, operations here 24/7, programmatic administration. Some are not, fully remote. And, there's a struggle there to, where's the equity, so we're still working, through that. And I think a lot of organizations or companies may be, trying to figure that out as things kind of level set, hopefully.
Absolutely. Thank you, Wendy. James, how about you?
Yeah, I think Tesla's response has been generally pretty good. At the start of pandemic, a lot of people were able to work from home, and if you had to be into the office for something like you're working on manufacturing or running an in-person test, they usually provide you with PPE. And at the start of the pandemic, they actually took your temperature at the door to make sure that you didn't have a fever. And there's hand sanitizer everywhere. And they also provided on-site vaccinations and boosters, and they encouraged as many people as possible to get them. So I thought their response was generally pretty good. I think nowadays, though, people are just generally tired of it. So I think things are getting a lot more lax, unfortunately. But also, yeah, like people are able to work remote. Like I'm doing a hybrid schedule. So like today I'll work remote, tomorrow I'll go into the office. So it's been generally pretty flexible and good.
Great, thank you, James. And so Wendy had to step off actually for a work-related activity. She'll be right back. I love your chats. Thank you so much. I'm seeing the agreement on the equity and the perception of equity. I'm actually seeing something that is related to this, which is kind of, this feeling, I think Candy and Amanda brought it up, of the work day gets really blended with your life day, right? Like so you may end up working 16 hours because you're just home working and then going and doing something and coming back and working, and the lack of real responsivity to this, and acknowledgement and recognition for this extra work, which leads to burnout. There's not clear walls between literally your personal life and your professional life anymore, and I think we've had to really let go of that. I'm going to get into one of the questions, and I'm going to put it in this chat here that was sent in the poll. And I'd love for, James, I know you have a story that you want to tell about kind of your shift, your mental shift, your philosophical shift here. And it might be appropriate to address it here, but also everybody else, especially as you are all professionals with, varying degrees of flexibility around your work situation. Feel free to chime in and answer this question. So the question is it realistic to search for work from home opportunities, as you're thinking about a mid-career shift, to continue protecting vulnerable family members from the current pandemic? Okay, so quickly, I would just say, yes, it's extremely realistic. I think I see, 200, 300% more job openings and opportunities that are remote only or remote flexible. So I think it's very much a possibility. But, you know, I know that James, you had a story to share, so I'll let you kind of talk about that too.
I mean, I think it's perfectly reasonable to search for work at home opportunities while the pandemic is still happening. That's one that definitely a valid concern. And I think a lot of employers are willing to oblige that request, even if they don't say the job is specifically remote. So, for example, one thing that I'm planning to do is I'm talking this out with my manager right now, but probably like have a transition year starting in a couple months, and then after that go fully remote. And actually, like, I'm lucky enough in that my manager and director are willing to vouch for this kind of opportunity. So I think it's definitely worth asking when you're interviewing or trying to find a new job if there's an opportunity to work remotely. And if your manager obliges, then I think that that's definitely like a plus, and it shows that your manager is willing to work with you and kind of cares about, you know, what your situation is.
Great, thank you, James. I see a lot of people chiming in saying, yes, lots of jobs are advertised as remote. Sylvia asks, what does flexibility look like for those jobs where remote work is not possible, e.g. a floor nurse at a hospital? And I do not know, apologies for not knowing kind of what industries you all are in, but if you guys have any insight into that or what that means to you, please feel free to chime in. You know, I do wonder how much we're relying on the goodwill, altruism, and giving nature of people in these, you know, first responder jobs and also in education, for example. I think there's a lot of that. And I think there's a question. I mean, I would wonder whether or not flexibility should look like, you know, bonuses, pay, so they can save up for something that is, you know, that can help with their life goals, you know, or different life aspirations. But feel free to chime in. And also, I wanted to ask, for those of you, this being about the mid-career shift, have we hit on all of the reasons that you guys are considering it? You know, James said that he had the flexibility of and really the understanding of his supervisors to help work with him on a shift, you know, that starts with, you know, a little time off that then transitions to fully remote. Others?
So I can't speak specifically about like floor nurses or anyone who's like on the ground floor. I do work with a lot of technicians who have to physically be into the office. And I think I really can't really speak for them, but kind of the things that I noticed that keep them happy, especially around the pandemic, career progression and bonuses. I think like our managers are very understanding, and they know that, you know, it's a very tough time. So I think they're willing to not only just give them more pay and more responsibility, but also give them a seat at the table, because those are the guys who are really like hands on the ground doing a lot of the work. And a lot of their feedback is valuable when it comes back to upper management. Like we actually have those guys in a lot of our like manager and review meetings as well, because we value their feedback. So, and then also, this is not for every technician, but we do try to make commuting easier for them, because a lot of times these guys who are on the ground floor, they can't afford to live in the Bay Area. So they have to live like 2-3 hours out. So there's kind of an understanding of like flexible work schedules. And also, if possible, we can try to help with their commute costs as well. So either through like shuttles that they can take back and forth, or tax advantages when it comes to like public commuting, or even sometimes like we'll just let them take some cars out and use those as commuters, because we kind of get bonus testing from that as well.
That's great, James. Thank you for sharing that. So we have finding fulfillment with your career, to justify the extensive work hours. Mark says, yeah, metro issues, transit issues, you know, that really is, yeah. So the ability to actually make it there. So, you know, James hit the nail on the head, being able to be flexible around that. Yep. So Thomas talked about, so I asked the question about other reasons why people are thinking about mid-career shift. And we got fewer people to do the work and no pay increase. And we also got just boredom and frankly, lack of a progressive career path, you know, that isn't being kind of laid out collaboratively. Let's see, quarantine slowing down quietly. Yeah, that's true too. And that's really Ariana, what Sylvie's saying here is really what Ariana Huffington's saying, is that people are really pausing and saying, is this the type of life, you know, that I want? Is this the work that I want? Okay, let's see. Another question I want to go ahead and ask. I mean, this has really come up with it's related to the remote question, but somebody else had asked, could folks on this webinar provide some advice for moving to a new area? And I must, you know, whoever wrote that question, if you might chime in a little bit and give us a sense of, are you thinking about moving to a new area? Or are you just, have you already moved and you're looking for jobs in a new area? I think, you know, just in the stories that we're hearing, folks either can't afford to live in the area, so already very distanced, or they're finding their ability to take their move to, say, Minnesota, James, is, you know, what you had alluded to earlier, and they're finding, you know, better situations for themselves in that move. So anybody have any advice on moving to a new area? I will say that I personally spend time between New Mexico and the Washington, D.C. area. And my husband and I both work remotely full time. And we have no issue transitioning. It's just a mindfulness around time zones, but we have no issues shifting locations. And many of my close friends and colleagues have done very similar things, if not full moves, broken up their time. And I will say that I have another colleague that their company has adopted a 6-week a policy where they allow 6 weeks of living wherever they want in the world, and that they will even help their employees find housing, you know, so that they could, if they wanted to up and go to France, as long as they're mindful of the time zone situation, they can do that, and they will help find housing for them so that they can travel and work, you know, for 6 weeks of the year. So I do think that moving to a new area is really, you know, let's see, what company is this? She's in a healthcare consulting. I am blanking on the exact name, but I will find out for you before the end of this webinar. Let's see.
Yeah,
go ahead, James.
Sorry, I was going to talk about moving to a new area. Yeah,
Sure.
I don't know if, I guess I don't know if there's any specific aspects you're interested in, but I think one thing that helped me out was just getting to explore the area first and deciding like where you want to move in person. Because I moved to LA in 2012 and I went in completely blind, and I was completely lost about where to go and like where to actually settle in at that time. So I think it just helps to visit the areas that you're thinking about first in person.
Absolutely, that's really great tactical advice. So I have a question here. I'd love to hear more about work-life balance even before the pandemic, and how a mid-career change affected that stability-wise. So, I mean, I can talk a little bit about that given the fact that I have a Brady bunch of children. And I don't know how many of you And feel free to chime in if you guys are working moms or working dads where the pandemic has really added an extra load around childcare. You know, so for me, our life has always been a balance to the point of, you know, the career we made a personal decision for the career to play backseat, so that the companies or the organizations we work with have always, we've looked for work cultures that really promote that work-life balance, that talk about it, that are really open to it, because we find that it's untenable. I've worked with places that have an expectation, you know, of working no matter what, and it was really untenable. And having to constantly pick between family and work, it does create, even if it's not a toxic work culture, it creates a toxic personal life, you know, where you have to make that shift all of the time. For me, that was one of the shifts in my mid-career when we're raising the kids, you know, to really take a pause and say, it's not just about the professional climb, it's about the professional organizations that match our expectations in terms of culture. And at times that's created a need to take a pay cut, which is unfortunate. And in other situations, we were able to find very competitive salaries. The other thing to really, you know, talk about is the level of stress around childcare. No matter, I don't care how you cut it, has increased infinitely. I mean, just infinitely. Now, it's not even about whether or not there is childcare or not whether or not you have childcare, like you feel comfortable sending your kids to a childcare provider or not. But the fact is, everybody is 10 times more mindful. If your child has a runny nose, you generally are asked to keep them home. And so the weight of, and then also virtual schooling, you know, how do you make sure your children aren't getting lost in virtual schooling? Meanwhile, you have 7 devices going on, you know, everybody on conference call at various times, you know, and trying to manage space and time for that and ensure that people are really, really engaged. Somebody asked, how do you assess for that culture from the outside? I think those companies that are really proud of that culture made intentional choices to have that culture, publicize that. You know, be it about in the About Us section, they talk about their values, they talk about their company policies and cultures. Glassdoor is always a really helpful resource. So going there and seeing what people say. And also, I have been in the habit of requesting informational interviews about the company, even before I apply for jobs, you know, to talk to various individuals. And sometimes I'm denied because those people don't have time, but a lot of the HR leads take time to do that. So I have found the ability to, with a little initiative, to get a sense of that work culture before even applying for a job there. So Wendy, just to catch you up, we were talking about, you know, mid-career shifting and how the even work-life balance even before the pandemic and how mid-career change affected that stability-wise. If anybody has any comments there besides what I just, you know, alluded to, please feel free to chime in.
I think for, I was doing for-profit. I was like in for-profit and then also in the arts world. But I think it's also interesting to look at your previous experiences and how they link together. And so I wanted to do something that was still related to food, since I had worked in hotel, food and beverage, and managed for Le Pain Quotidien, and wanted to, but instead of working for a national organization, wanted to work with a place that's more local. So I interviewed with the Capital Area Food Bank, but but then they offered me to work on a program. But then they came back with working as a manager, which is odd because I had management experience. So I took it as a manager, but there was a reason why I got out of management. But I think now, with my DEI work with the organization, I'm kind of looking back at my experience with Asian American Studies at the University of Maryland. So I'm often like, I'm sure everyone has heard about how you spin yourself, but I feel like everything that I've done, and there's an opportunity or a couple opportunities in the upcoming that I may want to explore, whether it's mental health and neuroscience, but it's kind of daunting. But I just think also with my previous experiences, I think it's more about, do I need a master's degree or how do I make that transition? And I think what is exciting is as we've progressed, right, your contacts and your friends, they're also at places, not all of them, but have grown as well. So I'm taking the time now to reach out to my old, my former colleagues and just to see what they're up to. Because at least for me, I'm not good at keeping in touch with people. I do have a great LinkedIn network. So I can always go back to that and kind of just re-engage, just seeing where people are and, for my next steps. Whether it's related to the food bank or not, I feel like I have a good resource that I can tap into. But I am starting to go to more like workshops, getting certifications. So I am kind of down that path to hopefully, kind of get myself to the next level, whatever that may be. But kind of, just in terms of education and skills, trying to brush up on those. I don't know if that answered the question, but.
Thanks, Wendy. James, did you have anything to add about this or to this? Excuse me. You're on mute.
Sorry, about work-life balance before the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think what I've noticed at my current job and a lot of the jobs I had before, I think, there was a very big push on just getting people in the office just to show face, even if they weren't necessarily doing something that needed to be in the office. And I think in general, like there was some allowance for things that are out of your hand, like you needed to take your kids back from daycare, or you have an emergency family thing to take care of. But it was I noticed it was a very taboo thing to say, mainly because like everyone is always expected to be in the office. And I think with the pandemic, it kind of made us realize that there's a lot of stuff that we can do remotely. Not obviously not everything can be done remotely, but I think a lot of people are taking more time to prioritize different things and kind of work their schedule around it. And it's been a lot more flexible because of that. And for me personally, like I don't think I've lost any productivity because of this flexibility. I usually, like when I'll email people, I'll maybe email people like right before I leave work, but I'm not expecting a response until the day after. So I think also like I think people are much better at managing expectations now that the pandemic has happened, because everyone's going through something or has some other obligation to take care of, and people are starting to realize that now.
Thank you, James.
I just
go
want
ahead.
to comment on the productivity as well. I think the productivity is there. I think the challenge, once again, it depends on the industry and what role you're in. But with my team, I definitely, as a manager, feel like there's something lost when you're not physically engaged with the person, having any of that human quality. Because what happens is they're like, oh, do I do a Zoom chat or what do I do? It's like, but if you're in person, if you can establish the relationship, it helps kind of, just helps team members be more proactive, just feel more comfortable. So I just feel like it's taking me longer to train my team to feel comfortable. So I actually cannot wait until we're back in the office. I mean, just once a week is helpful. I'm not saying, full time. Once a week, depending on what the project and position is, it's like twice a week, but, have definitely recognized you can do work from home. I mean, for sure. I mean, the productivity sometimes is like maybe not more, but you feel attached. You can't leave your laptop then when you're at home. Like you're like Zoom, you're waiting to be responsive. So
Right.
you're hyper almost engaged.
Right. James, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just agreeing. Yeah.
Yeah. So I have one more question here, and I actually want to kick this one off. It says, what advice do you have for those of us, and some of these, excuse me, some of these overlap each other, but what advice do you have for those of us who have been self-employed or entrepreneurs for the last 10 years and are looking for a change? And I kind of typed this earlier, but I think one of the biggest things, so just so you know, I've spent 20 some years in the nonprofit sector. I've been a consultant. I've been a staff member. I've been on the executive leadership team. The last year of my life, and that ended just before the holidays, was with a startup tech firm called Boodle.ai. It's an artificial intelligence SaaS platform. So it couldn't have been more of a deviation from anything that I'd done before in the past. I think, it's really important that you have a good sense of why you want to make the shift. I think it's one thing to say, I don't really like where I am right now, but there is some, I think, self-awareness and deep dives that people have to make around what does it mean to, like, what are the values in which you really want to operate under? What does it mean to be a staff member? What are the benefits you have as a stable staff member to an organization? What does it mean to be a consultant, to where you're really beholden to the needs of your clients, where, your change and your changes and recommendations and suggestions are looked upon, but you don't necessarily have a platform to see them through as a consultant. I think it's also important to get under the veneer of, some of the, and I'll tell you, this is part of my journey, sexiness around, certain industries. So I worked at Boodle.ai for the last year. Having been a graduate of the Smith School, I had a lot of assumptions around what it would look like to work at a tech startup. I had a lot of ideations around how fun it would be to be part of that, core group of, 10, 15 that are really building something from scratch. And making decisions around, do you take outside investment? Do you keep the equity inside? Those are things that got me really excited about joining a company like that. I did not do my research on how quickly funds get, let's say, used up just by one maybe sideways decision, for a startup that does not have a lot in their bank account. And how quickly, when something like that happens, there is real disarray in the company as a result. So there really is no stability, at all. And so these are things like, some folks really, love to, operate from the seat of their pants, see what every day is going to be like. What kind of adventure is it going to be like? That's awesome. For other folks who just maybe want, a little more notice when something's going, wrong, or a little more stability or something to count on every day. I think these are questions, at a more internal philosophical self-awareness level. It's really important for you to figure that out if you haven't already before you make that shift. So for that shift to be one that, you can look back on and say was the right choice, So I will leave it at that around some advice that I would have, but feel free to chime in. Anybody else who has had similar experiences or even very different ones, I'd love to hear
it. Yeah, I wanted to kind of add on to what you're saying, Jennifer, in terms of like the adventure and what you think is the flexibility, and there is, but I was a contractor with an arts organization doing festival logistics prior to coming to the food bank. But I was getting, quite frankly, a little tired of like, after that 9 months was over, what was I going to do for the next 3 months? And just, you know, and I'm not a person, or I wasn't, and with 2 children, I mean, some people are type A go-getters, fantastic. Me, I need a little bit more understanding who you are, a little bit more structure. And so that's where I, you know, transition back into, you know, looking for a full-time opportunity where maybe I think down the line I could go back into like consulting or entrepreneurial type of work. But right now, you know, I needed to kind of have something a little bit more stable. And, you know, I was concerned I wouldn't have that quote unquote flexibility by, you know, kind of being tied to a company and organization. But surprisingly, I feel I've had pretty good flexibility working at, I think, the food bank. And I think in other places too, I think it's just companies are evolving and, you know, just understanding what, you know, what the culture is. So yeah, I think it's just being mindful of what you really want and what's important to you. And then, you know, instead of rushing, like sitting down and like asking those questions during interviews or those informational sessions too, to really, yeah, have a good understanding for what you want and the, you know, your next chapter.
Yeah, I have to echo that, like understanding like what you really want out of it, and what you're looking for. And I think also when you're discussing this with whoever you're interviewing, like you make sure that it's more of a two-way street on this, as in like you're expressing what you're looking for in this role and kind of the things that you want, in addition to the employer asking you about your credentials. When I first started interviewing a long time ago, it was all about, you know, how to make yourself look more impressive. But kind of as you get more senior, as your priorities change, like I've noticed, like the interview process becomes more of a two-way street in that regard. So, for example, last month I wasn't looking specifically for a new job, but I was interviewing at Apple, and I talked with a bunch of people on their different engineering orgs, and I would always ask them very specific questions about kind of their organizational structure, you know, how they handle remote work, as we kind of alluded to in the last question, and then also kind of like what career progression looks like, what my expected responsibilities, and kind of like what are the resources available in order to advance or to get whatever you need. So yeah, I think just understanding what you want, and also if you're going to be employed in this more stable full-time job, understanding what the employer can actually offer you.
That's great. Anybody else, excuse me, anybody else in the group that might have something to add to this question? I will say one more quick story. I have a friend of mine from undergrad who has been in pharmaceutical sales, and he is a VP at a pretty large pharmaceutical company in San Diego, California. Excuse me. And over the last 2 years, he's published 2 books, fiction books, a novel and a series of short stories. And he has been trying to figure out in his mid-career shift how to move from pharmaceutical sales to a more creative role in his life, you know, to be able to dedicate to his art. Granted, he has 2 young children, so it's really hard to forego the paycheck to be a starving artist. And he also played around with the notion of taking maybe a even higher paid job, heavier on the leadership role and title, to save up money over the next 5 years and then kind of call it quits altogether. And he did a variety of things. So one, he brought on a financial advisor that helped do some money modeling based on his life and his children and his aspirations and what he has and doesn't have saved for retirement. that helped really provide some pathways financially. So in terms of the question around, basically around, how do you make this change the question around the advice around making this change. If financial stability is something you want to maintain, I would highly recommend you find some good financial advisors. If you're interested, feel free to chat me privately and I can send you somebody we work with. But they were able to provide some avenues to say, okay, well, this is what it looks like if you take that higher paying job. This is what you look like if you stay where you are. This is what you look like if you, take a part-time job and just write, for example, so to map that out and provide some tangible pathways around that. He ended up deciding in December, he was very gung-ho about taking the new job. And after that money modeling and after actually doing the informational interviews, and looking at the indirect costs of the travel related to the higher paying job, it ended up being more of a lateral move. So he decided to stay put because he, even though he's bored and he's kind of burnt out, he decided to stay put because he knows he can continue a part-time creative career in the current job that he has. It's like the devil that and so I just kind of put that out there as another live example for how somebody's done that, All right. So I just want to be mindful of time. We have a little over 5 minutes, about 7 minutes left in this session. I want to make sure, this is the time. If you have any other questions, please get it into this chat. I want to make sure we address kind of the different things that you were thinking about around change. What's driving you to that change? Are they the same as those that Forbes and MSNBC are talking about in terms of why folks are the leading causes of, say, this Great Resignation? Is there anything we've talked about here that maybe address the fears that folks have and, whether or not they think this kind of repurposing of self during this mid-career shift is worthwhile? If there's anything we haven't asked, let me know. Or haven't answered or addressed, let us know. Feel free to throw it here in on the chat. And Wendy and James, anything you want to add to that? So actually, before you guys get started, we did get somebody that says, okay, yes, absolutely, I will. It's a direct message around the financial advisor. Happy to, just everybody who wants me to share the financial advisor, just direct message me and I will send that out. So Wendy and James, anybody else? Is there anything that we have not covered that you wanted us to during this time?
No, I just wanted to say thank you and for everyone that's joined the call. But I think, just taking that leap of faith of doing your research, not knowing what your backgrounds are. But like I said, I have 2 children. I can't, Jennifer mentioned like financial advisor, financial planning, to see, can you make that shift? Or, James talking about just into that 2-way conversation. It's not, when we're first starting out, it's kind of a 1-way conversation, but as you're kind of, with more experience and just, perhaps higher up in the organization, it just becomes more of definitely a 2-way conversation. So having your, what's important to you and having those conversations or laying those out, I think has been helpful to me, like being more transparent and honest. And then I get that response back. And so that's been, I think, we're always learning something. And I think that's an area that I need to be a little bit more, just more upfront about. So I think that's been really helpful for me, is just being upfront and understanding what my needs are and how do you balance that in relation to the organization or company. And, just throwing it out there.
Thanks, Wendy.
Yeah, just want to say, yeah, thanks for having me on. And I think this is a really important conversation that kind of everybody's going through right now. And there's a lot of unknowns, so it's just really good to talk about it and have a discussion around it.
Thank you, James. We do have one other question that came up here around informational interviews. You know, is it something that people do before the position is even posted? And I would say yes, because it's not just about the position, it's about the corporate culture. You know, so I see some nods here, but would you do informational interviews once an ad is already out is the question, or do you do it before there's even a position posted? So Wendy, James, do you have anything to add to that?
No, just kind of piggyback what you were saying. Do it. It's doing it before, because it's about the culture, but it's about the company as a whole, not just the position. So, and then sometimes from those conversations, there are other opportunities may come out of it. Or, you know, once the person you're speaking with, maybe they hear something that you weren't thinking about for yourself and make other recommendations. So yeah, informational can definitely before the job, you know, job posting.
I would actually, personally, I would actually do informational interviews once the posting has been made. This is because while some people can speak about the general company-wide culture, a lot of times each sub-team has their own culture within the greater organization. Going back to the Apple example, actually after they reached out to me, I set up an informational interview with someone I know who recently left the team and kind of tried to get their thoughts about why did they leave the team? What did you think? I think actually doing informational interviews about people who left the company is a really good thing to do, because they'll give you a much more honest answer and kind of give you the reasons behind why they left or why they would stay and if they would recommend. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I refer people to Glassdoor all the time. You know, generally people who write in Glassdoor either have an extremely great experience or they don't have a good experience. You're kind of getting both ends of the spectrum to get a sense of, you know, company culture there. So I totally agree. Let's see. All right. It's pretty much time at this point. Thank you guys all for being on the call. I really appreciate not just your participation, spending time with us today, but also just how interactive you all have been on the chat. I really, it's a lot more rewarding for everybody involved to get not only our perspectives, but all of your perspectives as well. So thank you so much. Thank you, James. Thank you, Wendy, for taking time out of your day. And I will leave it to Sylvie to close up. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much, everyone, again, for joining us. Thank you, James, Wendy, and Jennifer. Just a reminder that we're going to have a part 2 of this conversation this coming Friday, and I put the link in the chat. So hopefully we'll see you again on Friday. And a recording of this webinar will be sent to the email address you used to sign up for this session. So thank you again. Have a wonderful day. Stay healthy and go Terps. Bye.